Welcome back to Barely Built Right. Today we are talking about fender flares and wheel spacers on the Slacker. I'm going to be adding 2-inch wheel spacers and universal fender flares from Amazon. I'm going to kind of write this out as a guide that you could use on almost any truck, and then at the end add a little bit of tracker specific requirements as well. Let's jump right into it. So I started off with these 2-inch wheel spacers. These are for my bolt pattern, 5x5.5 to 5x5.5, so I can reuse my factory wheels. And then the universal fender flares. As usual, links are in the description down below, so be sure to check those out. Take a look at the truck before we do everything, kind of give us a baseline idea of where the tires sit and how the truck looks right now. Putting the spacers back on, I want to make sure that the mating surface is nice and clear, there's no debris in there. And I want to try and keep everything centric, keep everything as close as aligned as possible. I use an extension with a socket to hand tighten or to start the lugs for the spacers. And then I come in with a ratchet and ratchet them down evenly in the star pattern, making sure that I'm not tweaking anything or putting them on crooked. This is where I talk about using a torque wrench to tighten the lug nuts down to the required specification. This can vary from spacer to spacer, from material to material, and depending on your vehicle. So this is where I did that. This is where I talk about that torque wrench thing again. So here we can see the look with just the wheel spacers on and no flares. You can see that poke from the tires definitely adds an aggressive stance, and I think really beefens up this little truck. Now that it was a little bit wider, it is time to start on the fender flares. I start by applying masking tape in long strips on the flares, and then I hold them up to the position where I want them to be. I use the mounting holes on the flares and align them with certain points on the car that I can remember and use as reference for the other side. I use a drill bit that is just barely larger than the rivets that I'm going to be using and drill a hole. In this case, these flares do not have holes pre-drilled, so I go through the flare and then into the sheet metal behind them. On this very first one, I made a marker hole and then actually took the flare off and finished drilling it, but I found this to be cumbersome later and ended up just doing them while they're all mounted to the car with the tape. I started at the top and then worked my way out and down from there. I did make one mistake on this first flare, and that was drilling 2 holes before putting 1 rivet in. Do 1 hole, then 1 rivet at a time, 1 hole, and then 1 rivet. I had to drill it out and line it up better because of that. After the flare was mounted, I used a piece of tape to mask where I was going to cut it to line it up with the front fender edge. I realized a bit later it would have been better to put this piece of tape on top of my cut line. Would have helped me cut it a little straighter, but I still made it look alright in the end. I started to pick up my rhythm after the first one, and it was pretty much a rinse and repeat for the process, drilling holes and popping rivets. And from there, we were pretty much done. Now this isn't exactly a bolt-on process. On the tracker, with the additional swing arc, because of the wheels being 2 inches further out, I definitely ran into clearance issues on the back of the fenders. It wasn't anything that a little Sawzall action couldn't fit, so I went to town cutting off about 3/4 of an inch of the front edge of the fender, and also about the same off of the inner flange. And then I also hammered that flange back so it was no longer as much of a cutting edge, and then I painted everything black again to help it blend in a little better. Thanks for watching. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this, and we will see you guys in the next one.